So how has your life been up to now? The response to that kind of question can vary depending on your mood of the day, can't it? You look back over life and we can think, well, some days I look back and that was not so bad. And other days we think, oh, not so good. The topic today, we're going to look over the life of Jacob. You know, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's who we're looking at, that Jacob. Because in Jacob we see the natural self, the part of ourself that's in the world. You know, he's the natural world, and the writings say that this part of us is only regenerated after a considerable length of time. Right? This isn't going to happen quick. The natural is only regenerated after a considerable length of time. The very name Jacob pictures someone who's grasping and trying and working and conniving to get ahead. We can picture Jacob as industrious, ambitious, he's clever, and we're going to see in the readings today that he's also someone who looks back on his past life. And his moods, his days can be very different of how he sees that. Because he's had experiences of suffering, he's had experiences of fear, of grief, of humiliation, but also some joy and some gratitude as well. We can think of a passage in the writing that says, when we look back on our life, we can see that sometimes we were led by our thoughts and sometimes we were led by our loves. And I think that's what we see with Jacob, a kind of a complete picture. The first reading I want to share with you, though, to kind of set this up, is from Genesis chapter 47. Jacob has been brought from the Holy Land to Egypt, and he's meeting with Pharaoh for the first time. And it says, "Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, 'How old are you?' And Jacob said to Pharaoh, 'The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage.'" Kind of a sad way to look back on your life, right? Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. It's a man who looks back and just sees the error of his ways, and he sees it wasn't very good. I wasn't as good as my fathers. And I think we all have times like these, where we look back and we seem to only be able to recall the things that we're not proud of. We wish we'd been kinder to a coworker, been more loving to somebody who needed it, wish we were on better terms with a family member. We all have something that we look back, some situation where we hurt somebody else and we wish we could take it back. This is a state that comes to us at some point or another. And Secrets of Heaven has the following to say about it. This is 6097. "Few and evil have been the days of my life," means that the state of life of the natural has been full of temptations. Temptations in that state are meant by the statement that the days have been evil. All temptations appear to be evil because they are inner feelings of anxiety and distress and of seeming damnation. For at such times a person is thrown into a state involving his own evils, and as a consequence of which he is in the midst of evil spirits who make accusations and thereby torment his conscience. But the angels still protect him. That is, the Lord does so through the angels. The Lord preserves him in a sense of hope and trust, which are fighting strengths from within that enable him to offer resistance. The natural is particularly subjected to temptation when it is to receive the spiritual, for in it reside evils of life and falsities of doctrine. That is the reason why Jacob says what he does about himself, for here he represents the natural in respect of truth. Jacob, seeing his faults, is us seeing that our life on the natural level just wasn't up to par. Right? I shouldn't have lost my temperature. I shouldn't have been worried about making myself look great. I shouldn't have been being so egocentric. I shouldn't have, you can fill in your own blank. And there are certainly painful days for Jacob to look back to, right? There are things he's done wrong. As a young man, he got the better of his brother Esau, right? And yet, he'd also more than paid for it. If you think about the bad things that happened to Jacob, there's quite a number of them, right? He's frightened and in danger of his life. He had to flee his home to a faraway land without any possessions. He's just got to run. And when he runs, where does he go? He goes to Laban, where he worked and worked and worked, striving to achieve, only to find that he'd been kind of used and manipulated by Laban. His beloved wife, Rachel, for whom he labored all those years, she dies in childbirth. And the terrible day comes when his sons bring in the bloody coat of many colors, when Joseph is supposedly dead. And that morning, all that follows famine. So it's not like Jacob had an easy life, right? He had some tough times. And so when Jacob recalls his life and told Pharaoh that it had been a bad life, he was contrasting it with the lives of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And what's interesting about this is that the writings relate Jacob's disappointment, his disappointed appraisal of his life, to actual progress in our life. Get that? That disappointed look back on his life is progress in our life. How can this be? How can this be? Well, folks, this is the sermon. This next, 5 sentences I'll give you, this is the whole thing right here. All right? The reason this is progress is because we have progressed in our understanding of life and in our sense of values. It's that we have changed when it comes to matters of the heart and of matters of caring. And we might externally still have some of the same foibles. We still may mess up in this external world, right? You might still have that, desire to control everybody and everything, right? You might still have that inclination to self-aggrandizement or self-pity and stuff like that. Maybe you're stubborn or spiteful, I don't know. It's not, though, that we are worse than we used to be. The key is we do those things, but we care more. We know more. We're trying. There's a change, and we're disappointed when we do the dumb things that we do. That's the progress. You've done some things, and you go, boy, I'm disappointed. Because it wasn't always that way. It wasn't always that way. Jacob represents this natural part of us, which the writings clearly say is the last thing to be regenerated. It's the last thing, and it comes over a considerable length of time. The teaching is that external things are regenerated much later and with greater difficulty than the internal things that are represented by Abraham and Isaac. Let's read the number from 34:69. It says, "People therefore who do the good of truth, or who live in accordance with matters of doctrine, are regenerate as regards into interior things, which are their rational concepts, but not yet as regards to exterior, which are their natural things. For a person is regenerated to the rational part of his mind before being regenerated as to the natural part. The natural exists wholly in this world, and it is on the natural as their foundation that the person's thought and will are based. This is the reason why, while being regenerated, a person is aware of conflict between his rational or internal man and his natural or external man, and why his external is regenerated much later and with far more difficulty than the internal. Indeed, what is closer to the world and closer to the body cannot be easily rendered subservient to the internal man except over a considerable period of time and by means of very many new states into which it has to be brought. These states are states of self-recognition and recognition of the Lord, that is to say, of his own miserable condition and of the Lord's mercy, and so of humiliation through conflicts brought about by temptations." It's regenerated much later and with far more difficulty. Later in Jacob's life, we have another dramatic moment of him looking back, and we picture Jacob crossing the Jordan River. At this point, he's got a family. He has 11 children. He has flocks, possessions, servants, and he's saying in a prayer to God that I've crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and I now have become two companies. He's grateful. He's grateful in his heart. He knows he doesn't deserve these things, but he's looking back and saying, boy, Lord, you've been really good to me. There is this gratitude in his prayers. He says, I'm not worth the least of all the mercies and of all the truth you have shown your servant. Because years before, when he crosses the Jordan, he only had that stick to his name, right? He's fleeing Esau, and all he has is that stick. And he had, at that time, dreamed of that stairway to heaven. And he vowed to the Lord, he says, if you will be with me and keep me in the way that I am going, and give me bread to eat, clothing and put on, so that I come back to my Father's house in peace, that he would worship him forever. And so as he's coming back across the Jordan with all his stuff, he knows that God had certainly been with him, that he had been fed and clothed, and he had returned. But even so, there's fear at this moment of what lies ahead, because he's going to reconcile with Esau. He's terrified. He's grateful for everything God's given him, but he's terrified. Would Esau finally get revenge on him? He didn't know it was going to go well with Esau. He didn't know that. He didn't know that Esau would embrace him. And Esau would actually say to him, I have seen your face as though I have seen the face of God. A significant change has taken place. I'm trying to show you progress. This is examples of progress here. Because Jacob had separated from Laban. In the encounter with Laban, who he's just left behind to go for Esau, he'd seen a part of his life in a cold light that he hadn't known before. Right? That's what he's doing. His progress in life. Leaving Laban, go back to Esau. It's terrifying, but I'm going to do this. And looking back on his time with Laban, he sees that time as a trick, as a sham. Laban's, we're told, is a symbolic of immediate good, something in between. And that's what he realizes, that, you know what? This wasn't real goodness. Esau is a symbol for goodness. So he looks back on this life and he says to Laban, I bore the loss. I bore the loss. It was hot in the day and cold at night, and my sleep went from my life, or went from my eyes. He looked back on that hard work and sacrifice as a time of change. And this is what the writings show in the story, is that a motivational change that makes us see our life in a new perspective is a good change. That's progress. And they also tell us it's merciful for us to see these kind of shallow and pointless parts of our life that are only unmasked in retrospect. It's one of the Lord's mercies. Like, oh, you can think this is important now, and later you can learn that it's stupid. So he's like, I'll give you that. And we can look back and say, oh, I shouldn't have been chasing all that money. I shouldn't have been doing all that. Oh, yeah. This is Jacob's fleeing from Laban. He looks at Laban and he's like, this guy, he enriched me, right? All the flocks, all the stuff, right? He had been enriched by him. But he looks at Laban now in a new way that he hadn't done before. He goes, this guy isn't my friend. This guy isn't my friend. He wanted to get away from Laban. He doesn't want to seek that anymore. That, folks, is progress, right? We're trying to leave that behind. But just as, Jacob leaves and Laban pursues Jacob, sometimes those worldly motives come and hunt us down, right? You think, oh, I don't want to be that person anymore. Here I go, I'm going away. And here comes Laban. Hey, why'd you leave me for? Couldn't you have at least said goodbye? What are you doing? What are you leaving me for? I was so good to you. And sometimes we get caught up in those emotions. Sometimes we get caught up. Sometimes Laban actually gets there, and we start bragging about trivial things, right? But at that moment, when these two interact, we see Laban as someone who can hurt us. We're wary of him. We're wary of him. And we confront him, which is something that we didn't do before. We know that what he offers us is elusive, right? Jacob says to him, you changed my wages 10 times. You changed my wages 10 times. He's finally given it to him. That competitive ambition to be on top, to get the better of others, to win at every moment, you know. We get some of that success, but then we say, oh, for what? So what? That reward wasn't so satisfying in the end. Laban can't deliver what we really need. He can't. We never get anywhere in his land because he keeps moving the goalposts, right? Oh, work for me, I'll give you this. Oh, work for me, stay a bit longer. Always stay longer. Don't leave. And we look back, and then some part of us, we're kind of glad for the things that he's given us. But another part, do those years seem like a long time? 20 years. That's how long he was there. Twice Jacob referred to that time as 20 years. And the way it's captured in the story is, I worked for you for 20 years. It's like, this is a long time, which is kind of interesting in the context of when he says to me working for Rachel. It's like, that time was nothing because he loved her. But he looks back on that, and it's different. It's, I worked for you for 20 years. 20 years. So it's a bit about context, I suppose. But then we get to, I'm jumping on the timeline, I know, but we picture Jacob as an old man nearing death. This is from Genesis chapter 48. His two little grandsons are brought to him in a very tender scene, and between him and Joseph. This is from chapter 48. It says, now it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, indeed, your father is sick. And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob was told, look, your son Joseph is coming to you. And Israel strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, who are these? Joseph said to his father, they are my sons, whom God has given me in this place. And he said, please bring them to me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so he could not see. Then Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them, and he embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, but in fact, God has shown me your offspring. He's like, I never thought I'd see you, Joseph, and now I'm seeing your children. I'm seeing your children. Secrets of Heaven says that this is all about, the meaning is that not only an inflow of love was discerned, but also about the goodness and truth springing from it. But as you read more around this series, we find that it's really about Jacob. Jacob never thought he could be the person that he is at that moment. He's like, I never could have imagined, because these children represent these changing states, and that these two children, Ephraim and Manasseh, exist is an implication that Jacob has progressed. And so we're seeing that Jacob's like, I never thought I could be this person. I never thought I could see this. I never thought I could see this state, this place. Didn't think that would ever happen. Things had turned out beyond his dreams. And so we contrast that thankful looking back with a very different mood of how he was with the encounter with Pharaoh. Few and evil have been the years of my life. I can't believe I've made it this far. Jacob thinks back to the time when he had no hope of seeing Joseph ever again. And he's seeing that blood-soaked coat, mourned for many days. He refused to be comforted, and he says he's going to go to his grave in mourning. Even years later, when he's told Joseph's alive, he doesn't believe it. He's like, I can't believe it. But now he's in a place of, you know what? I've lived to see my son again. And he's in a strange new land with his sons kids, with his own grandchildren. So as we wrap this story up, I mean, think about it. Can we not remember a time when you couldn't imagine being the person that you are now? You know, maybe something's happened in your life where, you got married, you had kids, or a job interest, or some sort of a spiritual adventure, I don't know, whatever it happened, but you couldn't imagine where you are now. This is Joseph looking at those grandkids going, I can't believe it. We find ourselves caring more than we thought we ever could have. We find ourselves understanding more than we thought we could have. And we experience unselfish delight, which is better than the self-centered, like, how does Jacob come out of the womb grabbing at the heel of Esau? He's not doing that anymore. He's letting Esau lead. He's let Esau be the primary motivation. So, as we look back on our life, let's not say few and evil have been the years of my life. Let's not look back and do that to ourselves. Let's see that we've made amends with Esau. We've made good the priority. And that we don't buy into Laban's world anymore. We no longer chase what he's offering. We no longer get manipulated by him. We no longer do the right things for the wrong reasons. And even though, like Jacob, we're not perfect yet. We're not perfect yet. But we've made progress. We've made progress, especially on the inside. We're not the person we used to be. Amen.